Hello everyone, this is Bob and Threadbare, and welcome back to Threadbare Reviews. For today's review, I'm starting a new theme to go along with the game Psychonauts, and so anything with psychic powers, supernatural occurrences, and/or spiritualism and ghosts is fair game. As usual, I'll be kicking things off with a personal pick, and in this case, my movie of choice is the original Ghostbusters, which came out in 1984. The story about the story. Dan Aykroyd is a Canadian comedian and actor who first came to national prominence thanks to being one of the first cast members on Saturday Night Live. In particular, he and John Belushi created the characters the Blues Brothers and would go on to make a hit comedy film of the same name in 1980. He was also one of the stars of the 1983 film Trading Places, alongside fellow SNL star Eddie Murphy. I tell you all of this because, as Aykroyd was working in Hollywood in the early 80s, he was also developing the script for Ghostbusters, which was inspired by his fascination with parapsychology and spiritualism. This belief in the supernatural apparently runs in his family, although in Dan Aykroyd's case, he also wanted to take an opportunity to modernize the supernatural comedy, which had basically died out in the early 1950s. He had planned to write the film around his friends Eddie Murphy and John Belushi, but then Belushi died of an overdose and Murphy started working on Beverly Hills Cop. So instead, he decided to work with Bill Murray, another SNL cast member, along with Ivan Reitman, who had directed Animal House, Meatballs, and Stripes. During the pre-production, Reitman introduced Aykroyd to Harold Ramis, who co-starred in Stripes and directed Caddyshack, and the three of them decided to co-write the script and make Ramis another Ghostbuster. Other big names on the cast list include Sigourney Weaver as Dana Barrett and Rick Moranis as Louis Tully. Weaver was interested in the role because she wanted to expand away from horror films like Alien and thrillers like The Year of Living Dangerously. And since the script was still being written during development, she contributed elements like having Dana be possessed by a demon dog and having her be a musician. Moranis had a similar level of creative control, and so he's the main reason why Louis Tully is a wimpy nerd. Much of the filming took place on location in New York City, but most of the interior and studio shots were filmed in Los Angeles, since at the time New York didn't have much in the way of sound studios that weren't being used for late-night talk shows. It also was, and still is, an expensive city to film in. Thanks to the New York filming, and thanks to the need for extensive special effects for the supernatural elements, the budget of Ghostbusters came to roughly $25 to $30 million. Fortunately, the film was incredibly successful the moment it came out, and so it earned $296.4 million at the box office. It would then earn Columbia Pictures even more money thanks to licensed merchandise, early home video sales, a cartoon show, and a sequel in 1989. The film was also loved by critics, including a lot of the ones who hated Caddyshack and Stripes. Now, I can't even pretend that I've never seen Ghostbusters before now, but it has been a few years, so stick around and I'll tell you what I think about it. The review. 3 researchers at Columbia University in New York City have a close encounter with a ghost, and after getting fired from their jobs, they decide to start a small business dealing with ghost problems throughout the city. Things start slowly with just a consultation for Dana Barrett and a ghost capture at the Sedgwick Hotel, but then business picks up in a big way as ghosts and haunting become increasingly more common throughout the city. The situation continues to escalate as Dana and her neighbor Louis are possessed by demigods. The Ghostbusters eventually discover that her building was designed by a mad cultist who wanted to resurrect the Sumerian god Gozer the Gozerian and bring about the end of the world. Their business gets briefly shut down, and they get arrested on the orders of a skeptical EPA inspector, but as chaos reigns in the streets, the mayor of New York City decides to release them so that they can do something about it. They run into some trouble involving a giant marshmallow mascot and the potential destruction of Earth, but they eventually close the gate between dimensions and end the threat once and for all. So, one of the first things I noticed during my rewatch of Ghostbusters is that the beginning of the movie has a very fast pace. Within the first 15 minutes, the main cast has seen their first ghost, gotten fired from the university, and started their own business. Within the next 15 minutes or so, the Ghostbusters have their first big job, and the moment it's over, we get a big montage of them becoming a successful business and local celebrities. Now the pace does slow down as the climax looms, and the movie spends a good amount of time building things up, but I feel like the film could have been 10 minutes longer with more time spent on the early stages and still been a good movie. The special effects still look pretty good, at least considering the time period and the budget constraints. A lot of the effects are obviously animations drawn onto the frames of the movie, but they also had some neat practical effects, like the eggs that explode and start frying on the counter, and the moment when Dana levitates and rotates above her bed. I can at least say for certain that the effects don't distract from the film, and for an early 80s comedy, that's really the most you can ask for. Now, one thing that definitely holds up today is the acting. You can tell that the three lead actors have worked together for some time, and it was a good choice to have the characters start out with the same relationship. They also naturally fit into different roles. Egon Spengler is the brains, Ray Stantz is the heart, and Peter Venkman is the face. You can also tell that this role division extends to the actors, since Venkman has the lion's share of the screen time and a lot of the best lines in the film. And really, this worked out for the best, since Venkman is also the character who keeps things simple and relatable for the audience. The acting also has a lot of surprisingly subtle moments, like little expression changes, or the time when Egon signals numbers to Venkman when he's telling the Citric hotel manager how much their services will cost. Stuff like that really rewards additional viewings, and it justifies spending a little extra to get the HD version. Something else about the film is that you can see all of the research they did on the screen. When we first meet Peter Venkman, he's testing a couple of students for telepathy, and he uses a set of real cards that were designed for that specific purpose. The ghost terms used by Spengler and Stantz are also actual terms used by real-life ghost hunters. And while Gozer the Gozerian and Zool were made up for the movie, the Sumerian and Hittite civilizations that supposedly worship them are actual Bronze Age cultures. Details like these didn't have to be in the film to make it entertaining, but the fact that they are adds an interesting layer to it. Another good decision by the filmmakers was making all of the ghost-busting props and outfits as distinctive as possible. The brown jumpsuits are reasonable enough as far as work uniforms go, but then you have a very unique logo, the unusual shape of the proton packs and the beams they shoot, the ghost trap, the firehouse headquarters, and of course the eye-catching car with a unique siren. All of that really helped make the movie memorable, and it helped with the merchandising. Then there's the soundtrack, which is full of great songs and themes, and I'm not just talking about the main Ghostbusters theme by Ray Parker Jr. Overall, Ghostbusters is just as worth watching today as it was 35 years ago, and if you haven't watched it yet, you should take some time to do so. After all, there's a lot more to this film than what pop culture osmosis can give you. The analysis. The movie Ghostbusters has a very working-class feel to it. The protagonists are small business owners, and while they don't exactly deal with termites or rats, the fact is that they are essentially a kind of exterminator or pest control service. I mean, if you told me there was a company in New York City called Bugbusters, I wouldn't bat an eye. And that's the point. If you take away the ghosts and the big apocalypse, the main characters are just a bunch of working-class assholes who have to deal with stuff like mortgaging their houses to get business loans, hoping for enough clients to turn a profit, spending money on local ads and branding to stand out in the market, dealing with government regulators who don't understand and don't care about your business, and coming home every night exhausted and covered in slime. This working-class feel is a big part of what makes Ghostbusters unique, and it's why the movie works as a comedy. Normal movies about supernatural events and psychokinetic powers feature serious protagonists, either professionals who never seem to smile or normal people who are dragged into a world they don't understand. But in this case, the specialists act like normal people. And so even when they're talking about the end of the world, it sounds like they're discussing how tough work has gotten thanks to the big flea outbreak on the New York subway. This presentation grounds the movie, while most supernatural films try and take you to someplace else. And a lot of the comedy of the film comes from this strange juxtaposition. Of course, while I say the movie is grounded, it's also a power fantasy in many respects. Nobody believes the protagonists, but it turns out they're right about ghosts, and they invent a whole bunch of high-tech equipment that lets them do what no one else can. Because of this equipment, they can charge whatever fees they want from their clients, and they become famous celebrities that everyone is talking about. They get arrested briefly because an EPA agent thinks they're a bunch of con artists, but then they convince the mayor himself to release them, and crowds of people chant their name as they head out to save the world and stop a literal god from causing the apocalypse. Still, there is one big difference between this film and a lot of the other blue-collar power fantasies, and it's the fact that Ghostbusters is not anti-intellectual. A lot of blue-collar movies take that sort of approach by saying things like a college education is less useful than practical experience, or by portraying the rich and educated antagonists as snobbish and proud of an education that doesn't actually help them. However, in this movie, the Ghostbusters have at least 4 doctorates between them, and the devices they use are largely things they invented themselves while working for a major university. They do have to deal with people like Walter Peck and the Dean of Columbia University, who don't believe their work has any merit, but that makes them anti-establishment, rather than anti-intelligence. As such, what this movie implies is less that intelligence and education are overrated, and more that supposedly blue-collar jobs often require a lot more training and intelligence than what people outside the field give them credit for. Thanks for joining me again for today's Threadbare review, and I hope I'll see you next time. Until then, please remember to like, share, and subscribe, and if you have a little extra money to spare, you can support me on Patreon. Link in the description.